What if everything you think you know about the Viking Age is wrong? Not the battles, not the ships, not the legends, but the life they woke up to every single morning. Because the real story of the Vikings doesn't begin with war cries echoing across the sea. It begins in the dark, in the cold, in a silence so heavy it feels alive. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand what everyday life was truly like in the Viking era. Not the myths, not the glorified stories, but the raw, relentless reality that shaped one of the most feared societies in history. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you see this world. Before the raids, before the gold, before the names that history remembers, there was survival. The kind of survival that didn't care if you were strong, skilled, or wealthy. The kind that pressed against your chest the moment you opened your eyes. Imagine waking up not to sunlight, but to darkness that refuses to leave. In parts of the Viking world, winter wasn't just a season, it was an enemy. The sun barely rose, and when it did, it lingered weakly on the horizon like it didn't belong there. The air cut through wood, through fur, through bone. Every breath burned. Every movement felt heavier. Inside the longhouse, life pulsed like a single organism struggling to stay alive. The walls, built from timber and packed earth, groaned under the pressure of wind that never seemed to rest. Smoke from the central fire curled slowly upward, staining the air with a thick, constant haze. It clung to your skin, your clothes, your lungs. The smell was inescapable. Burnt wood, damp wool, sweat, animals. Because you didn't live alone. Animals were often brought inside during the harshest months, their warmth as valuable as their survival. The longhouse wasn't just a home. It was a fragile shield against a world that wanted you gone. And yet, even in these conditions, life didn't pause. There was no waiting for better days. The moment you woke up, the day had already begun without you. Tasks were not optional. They were the thin line between endurance and collapse. Fire had to be maintained constantly. If it died, restarting it in that cold could mean losing everything. Food had to be rationed carefully, every bite calculated, every resource stretched beyond what seemed possible. Even the smallest mistake, burning too much wood, eating too much too soon, could echo weeks later when supplies ran thin. But here's where the illusion begins to crack even deeper. Because not everyone experienced this life in the same way. While most fought daily just to keep the cold from consuming them, there were those who lived differently. Those who had more food, more space, more control. The elite, the jarls, didn't escape the harshness of the environment, but they bent it in ways others couldn't. Their longhouses were larger, their fires stronger, their tables fuller. Where others saw survival, they saw power. And power, in the Viking world, wasn't quiet. It was displayed. Still, even for the most powerful, one truth remained unavoidable. The land decided everything. Crops could fail. Winters could stretch longer than expected. The sea could turn without warning. No amount of wealth could fully shield you from a world that refused to be controlled. And when the environment tightened its grip, the difference between those who had and those who didn't became dangerously clear. Because surviving the cold was only the beginning. The real challenge came when something far more unpredictable started to disappear: food. And when food began to disappear, everything changed. Because hunger in the Viking world wasn't just discomfort. It was a slow, creeping force that rewired how people thought, how they acted, how they saw each other. It didn't arrive all at once. It started subtly. Smaller portions, thinner soups, longer pauses between meals, the kind of change you could almost ignore at first. But then the barrels began to empty. The dried fish racks looked thinner. The grain stores stopped feeling secure, and suddenly, every bite carried weight. For most people, food was simple, repetitive, and never guaranteed. Bread made from barley or rye, often coarse and dense, sometimes stretched with whatever could be ground into flour. Fish, dried, salted, or smoked, was a staple, pulled from cold waters that could just as easily take your life as feed it. Stews simmered slowly over fire pits, combining whatever was available into something that could warm the body, even if it barely satisfied it. There was no variety for the sake of pleasure. Food was function, fuel, survival. And yet, just a few meters away, another reality existed. In the halls of the wealthy, food transformed into something else entirely. It wasn't just about eating, it was about showing. Long wooden tables filled with roasted meats, fresh bread, butter, imported goods when available, and endless horns of mead passed from hand to hand. The fire burned brighter here, not just for warmth, but for spectacle. Shadows danced across carved pillars while laughter echoed through the hall. Where one family counted grains, another celebrated excess. But this wasn't just luxury, it was strategy. Because in Viking society, generosity was power. A leader who could feed others, especially in hard times, didn't just earn respect, he secured loyalty. Warriors followed those who could provide. Alliances were built over shared meals. And every feast was a message, spoken without words. I have enough, and if you stand with me, so will you. So the wealthy didn't just eat better, they controlled the very thing everyone feared losing. And that fear, it was always there. Even in the middle of a feast, even as cups overflowed and meat was carved in thick slices, there was an understanding no one could ignore. This could end. One bad season, one failed harvest, one storm too many. The abundance was real, but it was fragile, and everyone knew it, which is what made Viking society so brutally honest. There was no illusion of permanent comfort, no guarantee that today's strength would survive tomorrow's uncertainty. Every system, every hierarchy, every bond was built around that single truth: resources could vanish. And when they did, people adapted. Food wasn't wasted. Bones were cracked open for marrow. Leftovers were reused, stretched, repurposed. Preservation wasn't optional. It was life itself. Salting, drying, smoking, these weren't techniques. They were lifelines. Entire communities depended on their ability to think ahead, to prepare for a future that might be harsher than anything they had already endured. But even preparation had its limits, because there was something else shaping everyday life, something deeper than hunger, stronger than cold, more relentless than routine. Work. Not the kind you clock into and leave behind, not something you choose, but something that defines your existence from the moment you can stand to the moment your body gives out. And the truth is, in the Viking world, there was no such thing as rest. And the truth is, in the Viking world, there was no such thing as rest. From the moment your body could move, you belonged to the rhythm of survival. Not a schedule written on paper, but one carved into the land itself. The seasons dictated everything, and they did not negotiate. When the light returned after the long darkness, it wasn't relief, it was pressure. Because now there was work to be done, fast, relentless, unforgiving. Fields had to be prepared, soil broken by hand, tools striking the earth in a steady, exhausting rhythm. Seeds were planted with urgency, because any delay could mean losing the entire season. Every hour mattered, every task stacked on top of the next. There was no concept of later, only now or never. Men worked the land, fished dangerous waters, built, repaired, prepared for raids or defense. But the idea that they carried the weight alone, that's another illusion. Because inside the longhouse, the work never stopped either. Women weren't just maintaining the home, they were running the core of survival. Preparing food, preserving resources, weaving clothes, managing supplies, caring for children, and often making critical decisions in the absence of men. The household wasn't secondary. It was central. Without it, everything collapsed. And children didn't grow up slowly. There was no long transition between being cared for and becoming useful. You learned by watching, by doing, by enduring. Small hands carried water, gathered materials, assisted in whatever way they could. Responsibility wasn't given, it was absorbed. Because in a world like this, survival depended on everyone contributing, no matter how young. And yet, even with all this movement, all this effort, life could feel like it stood still. The same tasks, the same routines, the same cycles repeating day after day, season after season. Wake up, work, endure, sleep, repeat. Not because they lacked imagination, but because there was no space for anything else. The margin for error was too thin. One missed task, one overlooked detail, and the consequences didn't wait. But here's the part most people don't expect. Even in a life this harsh, this repetitive, this controlled by necessity, there were moments where everything shifted. Moments where the routine broke, where the weight of survival gave way to something else, something louder, something chaotic, something almost explosive. Because when the conditions allowed it, when food was available, when the season gave them just enough breathing room, Viking life didn't just continue, it transformed. Into gatherings filled with firelight and movement, into stories passed down like weapons, into rituals that blurred the line between celebration and something far more intense. These weren't just breaks from routine, they were essential. A release, a reminder that they were more than just bodies surviving against the cold. But even those moments, even the loudest halls, the brightest fires, the strongest sense of unity, couldn't protect them from what came next. Because eventually, the cycle always returned to its breaking point. And when it did, survival demanded something far more extreme than hard work. It demanded decisions that pushed people to their absolute limits. And when survival reached that breaking point, the rules changed. Because there comes a moment in every harsh world where effort is no longer enough, where working harder doesn't bring more food, where planning ahead doesn't stop what's coming. In the Viking world, that moment wasn't rare, it was inevitable. And when it arrived, people were forced to make decisions that went far beyond routine, beyond discipline, into something far more primal. The cold didn't negotiate, the land didn't forgive, and when both turned against you at the same time, survival became a question with no easy answers. Imagine the silence of a settlement where supplies are almost gone, no laughter, no movement beyond what's necessary, just the sound of wind pressing against the walls as if the outside world is slowly trying to get in. Inside, people speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because everyone is thinking the same thing. How long do we have left? Because this is what everyday life could become, not the heroic version, not the one filled with raids and glory, but the version where survival strips everything down to its core, where every decision matters more than ever. Do you eat now, or save it for later? Do you share, or protect what little you have? Do you stay, or risk everything by leaving? And leaving was never simple. The sea, so often seen as a path to power and expansion, was just as deadly as the land, cold, unpredictable, endless. But when resources ran low, it became something else. A gamble, a chance. Raids weren't always about ambition or conquest. Sometimes they were about necessity, about taking what you couldn't produce, about pushing outward, because staying meant slowly fading away. And that's where the image most people recognize finally connects to reality. The ships, the raids, the violence, not just as symbols of strength, but as consequences of a life that offered no safety net. Because when survival is never guaranteed, expansion becomes part of existence. But here's the truth that ties everything together. Viking life was never divided between peace and war, between normal days and extreme ones. It was all the same continuum, The same pressure expressed in different ways. Farming, fishing, building, raiding, all of it came from the same source, the need to endure. And that's what makes their world so different from ours. Today, we separate life into categories: work, rest, safety, risk. But in the Viking era, there was no separation. Everything was survival. Every action, every choice, every relationship was shaped by it. Even moments of celebration, of connection, of power, existed in the shadow of what could be lost. Which is why the biggest myth about the Vikings isn't that they were violent, it's that they were free. Because freedom implies control, it implies choice, and in their world, control was an illusion. The land decided, the seasons decided, the sea decided. They adapted, they endured, they survived. And maybe that's the real reason their story still echoes today, not because of the battles they won, but because of the world they managed to live through. So the next time you picture a Viking, don't just imagine the warrior standing on a ship staring toward distant lands. Imagine the person waking up in the dark, feeling the cold before they even open their eyes, knowing that the real fight hasn't even begun yet. And if this changed the way you see history, subscribe to the channel, because there's a lot more beneath the surface than what we've been told.